Charlie Kirk is dead, but the firestorm his death unleashed is only beginning. The headline flashed across screens with the kind of blunt finality that leaves a nation stunned. For some, it was a moment of silence, a pause to absorb the weight of a life abruptly cut short. For others, it was a spark, igniting conversations, arguments, and outrage that spread faster than the breaking news ticker could keep up with. Inside newsrooms, anchors shuffled papers with trembling hands, their voices straining to balance solemnity with the urgency of what they were about to say. Across living rooms, phones buzzed with push notifications, Twitter feeds collapsed under the weight of hot takes, and hashtags trended within minutes. It wasn't just that Charlie Kirk had died. It was the immediate sense that his death would not bring closure. It would open a deeper wound. Split screens painted a picture of a divided America. One corner showed supporters draped in flags, wiping away tears. Another displayed critics scrolling through old clips replaying his most polarizing statements. The contrast was raw, almost cinematic. It was grief colliding with schadenfreude, loyalty clashing with disdain. The very reaction to his passing mirrored the very identity of the man himself. Divisive, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. The mystery wasn't only about how he died. The deeper question, whispered on air, screamed online, debated at dinner tables, was what this death would now mean. Would Kirk's legacy be cemented as the voice of unyielding conservatism, a martyr to his followers? Or would it unravel under the scrutiny of a nation now free to dissect his contradictions without him there to fight back? Every passing hour made the lines sharper, the arguments louder. Supporters demanded reverence, critics demanded accountability, and amid that thunderous clash, something else began to stir, a presence, a voice, one not yet heard but certain to redefine the moment, because when history trembles, it always waits for the figure who can reframe it. The silence had barely settled before whispers turned toward one man, and when Barack Obama finally broke that silence, what he said didn't just echo through the headlines. It left the nation in stunned disbelief. But when Obama entered the conversation, the nation wasn't ready for what he had to say. Charlie Kirk's sudden death was not the quiet fading of a public figure. It was the detonation of a cultural fault line that had been building for years. He wasn't just another conservative commentator, he had become a symbol. For some, of unflinching patriotism and unapologetic defiance, and for others, of arrogance, bigotry, and the toxic politics that divided America. His death mattered because he had never been neutral. Every word, every headline, every viral clip was a declaration of war in the culture battles of the 21st century. Across America, the reactions reflected this fracture. Vigils sprang up in small towns and suburban megachurches, where supporters lit candles and described him as a warrior silenced too soon. At the same time, protests erupted in cities, where crowds chanted that his absence left space for healing. On late-night television, comedians cracked biting jokes, mocking not the death itself, but the contradictions of a man who had built a platform on exclusion, yet demanded unconditional loyalty. Cable news split itself down the middle. On one network, solemn music underscored montages of his fiery speeches, narrated as if he were a fallen soldier. On another, pundits dissected his controversies, replaying clips of clashes over immigrants, LGBTQ+ rights, and racial justice. The battle for his legacy was raging before his family could even plan a funeral. But the shock went deeper than his supporters and critics. For many ordinary Americans, Kirk's death raised unsettling questions. How could a single figure stir such visceral emotions, and yet beneath the shouting, something more dangerous was brewing? The debate wasn't just about Kirk anymore, it was about America itself. His death had become a mirror reflecting a country split down the middle, each side desperate to claim the narrative for themselves. It wasn't grief or celebration alone, It was the battle for memory, the fight to define what his life and death would ultimately stand for. This wasn't going to be another news cycle that burned out in 24 hours. It wasn't going to fade into the endless churn of headlines. Something about this moment had the weight of permanence. The stakes were rising, the divisions deepening, and every American could feel it in their bones. And then came the whispers. The rumor that someone unexpected was about to speak, someone who could not be ignored. What happens next doesn't just change the narrative, it changes the country's memory of Kirk forever. Because a controversy was coming, one so shocking, so seismic, that even those who thought they had heard it all would be left speechless. And at the center of it was a voice no one saw coming. Charlie Kirk did not stumble into influence. He built it, brick by brick, out of defiance and provocation. To his followers, he was a fighter, brash, unfiltered, a young man who refused to bow to the so-called elites. But peel back the surface, and a pattern emerges. Arrogance woven into every soundbite, contradictions hiding behind every fiery declaration. He was not just controversial, he was crafted for controversy. His rise began with the gift of confidence, a kind of unshakable certainty that could make a crowd lean forward or recoil in disgust. From university campuses to national stages, Kirk perfected the art of confrontation. He relished the moment when students gasped at his words, when professors clenched their jaws, when activists shouted back at him. For him, backlash wasn't a problem. It was the strategy. Archival clips reveal the tone that defined his career. One moment he railed against immigrants, insisting they threatened the fabric of American culture. Another moment he lectured young women on their true roles, sparking outrage and applause in equal measure. There were speeches where he mocked climate science with a smirk, daring experts to challenge him. In every clip, the pattern was clear. He didn't simply state an opinion. He threw it like a grenade, then stood back to watch the explosion. But what made him dangerous was not just the words. It was the contradictions behind them. He branded himself as the defender of American workers while aligning with policies that cut safety nets. He claimed to honor free speech while silencing those who opposed him at his events. He spoke of morality, yet thrived in a culture of outrage that profited from division. His power wasn't truth, it was theater. And the more outrageous the performance, the louder his spotlight grew. The arrogance was not subtle. In interviews, he leaned forward, smiling as if he were always one step ahead, brushing off criticism as weakness. To his audience, this confidence was intoxicating. To his critics, it was insufferable. He turned debate into spectacle, framing every opponent not as someone with a different view, but as an enemy to be destroyed. He didn't seek to win hearts, he sought to crush them. And yet in every villain's story, hubris plants the seed of downfall. The very traits that lifted Kirk into prominence, the arrogance, the theatrics, the insistence on never bending, also set him on a path toward implosion. By refusing to ever step back, by living on a diet of outrage, he created a persona too heavy to carry indefinitely. Indignation followed him everywhere. Immigrant families remembered his speeches with fear. Students replayed his campus appearances as symbols of everything they felt excluded by. Activists saw him not as a voice, but as a weapon pointed directly at their identities, even those who dismissed. In the end, Charlie Kirk's legacy was a paradox. A man who claimed to defend America, yet divided it at every turn. A figure who spoke of patriotism, yet thrived on tearing fellow Americans apart. He became almost inevitably the villain in the story of a fractured nation. His death shocked people, yes, but the emotions it unleashed were not only grief. They were anger, relief, and above all, a sense that the contradictions of his life would not be buried with him. And so the stage was set. A nation watched as the memory of Charlie Kirk began to harden, half praising him as a hero, half condemning him as a fraud. But history is never written by one side alone. Every villain's legacy depends on who steps forward after their fall. When America has found itself at the brink of chaos, certain voices have risen above the noise. Voices not with the sharpest insults, but with the clearest conviction. Among them, one name stands apart: Barack Obama. Calm, deliberate, and piercing when it mattered most, Obama's words carried a weight that cut through partisanship and reached deeper into the conscience of a nation. And in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, it was precisely this quality, dignity in the face of division, that made his silence deafening and his eventual intervention unforgettable. To understand why Obama's presence in this moment mattered, one must return to the many times he clashed with culture warriors like Kirk. Long before Kirk made headlines, others had tried to weaponize division, framing politics not as governance, but as combat. And each time, Obama became their foil, not by matching fire with fire, but by reminding the public that true strength lies in composure. During his presidency, critics hurled accusations with venom. They questioned his birth, his faith, his loyalty to the very country he served. Cable networks replayed the jeers late nights, HT commentators mocked the spectacle, and conspiracy theorists reveled in the chaos. Yet Obama never let arrogance dictate his response. He met attacks with a kind of patience that infuriated his enemies even more than anger would have. Where others shouted, he paused. Where others raged, he smiled. And in that contrast, millions saw not weakness, but resilience. The dignity became his weapon. In 2008, when his candidacy was dismissed as a long shot, he spoke not of power but of hope. In 2012, when cynicism threatened to drown out optimism, he reminded the nation that progress was never easy but always possible. Even after leaving office, as the political climate grew darker, Obama's speeches carried the same steady rhythm. He acknowledged the pain, honored the struggle, but never surrendered to despair. For immigrants, his words offered validation. For marginalized communities, they offered recognition. For young Americans, they offered a vision of a country that could be more than its divisions. And for his opponents, even those who loathed him, they carried the frustrating sting of a man who refused to be dragged into the mud. It is this history that made his eventual role in the Kirk controversy inevitable. Because while Kirk thrived on provocation, Obama represented its antidote. Where Kirk sought to inflame, Obama sought to heal. Where Kirk used contradiction, Obama used clarity. And that clarity was precisely why, in the silence following Kirk's death, the nation turned its eyes toward the former president. And yet, Obama's role was never easy. Every speech he gave was dissected, every pause interpreted, every word weighed heavier than those of others. That scrutiny built scars, but it also built credibility. He knew what it meant to be mischaracterized, to be vilified, to be told he didn't belong. He had endured it all, and yet he had never surrendered to bitterness. That endurance became a form of quiet authority, the kind no opponent could strip away. It was precisely this moral weight that made the world wait, breath held, for his response to Kirk's death. The nation didn't just want to hear from Obama, it needed to, because in the echo chamber of insults and chaos, only a voice like his could cut through and redefine the meaning of the moment. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't simply commentary. It wasn't another hot take to be lost in the cycle of outrage. It was history bending once again, not with the force of a shout, but with the precision of a scalpel. His words turned a controversy into a mirror, forcing the nation to look at itself. For Obama, the clash with figures like Kirk was never personal. It was philosophical, moral, even generational. It was about what America chooses to elevate: arrogance or dignity, division or unity, cynicism or hope. And so, when Charlie Kirk's death created a storm of voices, Obama's decision to enter the fray was not an accident. It was the moment that gave the chaos meaning, because when Obama speaks, history listens. And when he broke his silence on Kirk's death, the impact was seismic. The hours after Charlie Kirk's death unfolded like a digital hurricane. On one side of the screen, his supporters flooded timelines with grief-stricken tributes, hashtags of loyalty, and emotional declarations that their movement had lost its most fearless warrior. On the other, his critics wasted no time reminding the world of his most inflammatory moments. Threads erupted with video clips, quotes, and accusations, as if the battle for his legacy had already gone to war in real time. Conspiracies sprouted almost instantly. Some whispered that his death was no accident, that shadowy forces had silenced him. Others claimed it was staged, a ploy to make him a martyr. The right fumed at what they called disrespect toward the dead, while the left warned against whitewashing the past of a man who had built his empire on division. Every platform, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, became an arena, a battlefield where truth was less important than volume. Into this chaos, the media circled like vultures. Panel after panel debated what Kirk's death meant for the future of conservatism, for the youth-driven movements he had mobilized, for the fragile balance of American identity politics. Pundits sharpened their knives, preparing to frame the story through their own lenses. And hovering above it all was one question. Would Barack Obama say anything? For days he remained silent. His absence became a story in itself. Right-wing commentators dared him to speak, predicting he would seize the moment to gloat. Progressives waited anxiously, knowing his voice could calm, but fearing it might also reignite old fires. The anticipation built like static electricity, buzzing louder with each passing hour. Then, at last, he stepped forward. Not with anger, not with the arrogance so many expected. Instead, Obama did what he had always done best. He reframed the moment. Standing before the cameras, his expression solemn but unshaken, he did not hurl insults. He did not reduce Kirk to his controversies, nor did he glorify him. He reminded the nation of something larger, that death, no matter how divisive the life, forces us to reflect on who we are as a people. The tension was palpable. News anchors leaned in, social feeds froze mid-scroll, supporters braced for attack, critics braced for triumph, and both sides were caught off guard by what they heard instead. Obama spoke with calm truth, piercing the noise without raising his voice. He did not join the chaos. He silenced it, commanding attention through restraint. It was a masterclass in anticipation. The media had expected a political punch. What they got was a reminder of dignity. And as the words poured forth, it became clear. This was not going to be the eulogy of a man. It was going to be the dissection of a culture, the turning of a page in America's story. And then came the words that stunned even his harshest critics. The air was already electric. Screens glowed in living rooms, coffee shops, dormitories, and offices across the nation, each tuned to the same broadcast. Viewers expected Obama to be predictable, dignified, restrained, too careful for the moment. What they didn't expect was the precision of a counterattack that would leave the political landscape gasping for breath. He stepped up to the podium slowly, carrying the gravity of a man who had weathered storms no other leader in modern memory had faced. His voice began low, steady, as though weighing every syllable against the history that pressed down on the room. "Tonight," he said, "we are reminded not only of one man's passing, but of the path he chose, and of the path we now must decide to take." The audience stilled. Social feeds primed for memes or mockery froze instead. Obama paused, letting silence stretch, a silence that demanded attention. Then, with the authority of a professor and the warmth of a neighbor, he cut straight into the heart of Kirk's legacy without naming him directly. There are voices in this country who made it their mission to divide, to tell you that your neighbor is your enemy, to insist that the only way to matter is to step on someone else's dignity, and some people made careers, and fortunes off of that message. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some gasped. Others leaned closer, holding their breath. Obama didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words landed like stones tossed into still water, rippling outward into millions of homes. But let me tell you something, he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. That message, it doesn't build nations. It burns them down. It doesn't honor freedom. It chains it. On social media, silence cracked into a storm. Hashtags that had been flooded with grief and rage twisted mid-broadcast. Add unity, over fear began to trend. Some users clipped the line instantly, posting it with captions like, "This is how a president speaks." Obama leaned into the rhythm of the moment, pacing his delivery with surgical control. We've been told that mocking people's pain makes you strong, that tearing down immigrants, women, and minorities is just telling it like it is. But strength is not cruelty. Truth is not insult. Patriotism is not hate. And if we confuse those things, we lose not just a leader. We lose ourselves. The contrast was searing. Kirk's brash monologues, immortalized in countless viral clips, suddenly looked brittle when held against Obama's clarity. The man who had built his empire on sneers and outrage was shrinking in real time, his shadow evaporating under the weight of words that were equal parts scalpel and hammer. And then came the first real pause, the kind of pause that makes people lean in instinctively. Obama's gaze drifted across the room as though he was looking straight into the homes of those watching. "The measure of a life," he said, "is not in how many enemies you made. It is in how many bridges you built." The room exhaled all at once, but the punch had only just landed. Because in that single line, Obama shifted the conversation entirely. Kirk's admirers had framed his pugnacity as bravery, his critics as reckless cruelty. But Obama reframed it into something far more damning: irrelevance. Crowd members rose to their feet, some cheering, others clapping in rhythm. Online, even Kirk's allies hesitated. Some fired back with rage, but their voices were drowned out by the tidal wave of clips, shares, and captions. "This is leadership. This is history. This is the moment." Obama pressed forward, turning indignation into resolve. "We are at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of fear, division, and false strength. Or we can choose another path, one that honors the dignity of every human being, no matter where they come from, how they worship, or who they love." Each clause was deliberate. Each phrase carried on the weight of repetition. Goosebumps spread across audiences who knew they were witnessing something bigger than a speech. They were witnessing a reckoning. Social media feeds, once scattered with grief, conspiracy theories, and partisan talking points, crystallized into something rare: a unified sense that the national narrative had just shifted. Even late-night comedians who had feasted on mocking Kirk paused their writing rooms to clip Obama's lines instead. He closed with a voice both calm and devastating. "The legacy of division is short-lived. The legacy of unity is eternal. And in the days ahead, we will decide which one defines us." For a moment, the entire nation seemed to hold its breath. And then, like a dam breaking, the world roared. Clips went viral in seconds. Journalists raced to frame headlines. Commentators scrambled to recalibrate. What was supposed to be a somber, controversial moment had transformed into a political earthquake. Obama didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stepped back, leaving the podium as though he had dropped not just words, but a verdict. His calm contrasted so violently with the chaos erupting in real time that the scene itself became symbolic. Unity walking away with dignity, leaving vision to wither in its own noise. But even as the crowd erupted and social media went into meltdown, one truth became undeniable. The shockwaves of this speech weren't fading. They were only growing louder. It began as a ripple, a few clips posted on Twitter, a handful of captions like, "This is how a president speaks." But within minutes, the ripple became a tidal wave. Obama's words, delivered with surgical calm, ignited the internet in ways even his fiercest supporters hadn't anticipated. Hashtags exploded. Had unity over fear. Bridges. Not walls. Obama mic drop. On TikTok, teenagers spliced his lines into trending sounds, layering them over images of marches, immigrant families embracing, rainbow flags, and candlelight vigils. On Instagram, memes flooded timelines. Kirk's smirk on one side, Obama's solemn stare on the other. The caption reading, "Noise fades, truth remains." Cable news anchors struggled to keep pace. Some networks hailed the moment as a national turning point. Others called it opportunism. But the audience numbers told the story. Obama's speech had drawn in millions, and those millions were now carrying the debate into every corner of American life. Commentators clashed in real time. On one side, furious voices thundered that Obama had used a man's death to lecture the nation. On the other, calm but insistent responses framed his words as precisely what the country needed. A correction, a reckoning, a reminder of moral gravity. Every segment ended in heat, every panel a shouting match. Then came the celebrity voices, amplifying the storm. A-list actors tweeted the bridge line in solidarity. Pop stars posted tearful Instagram stories thanking Obama for speaking for the voiceless. Activists turned the soundbite into a chant, their rallies swelling overnight. Even athletes mid-season began wearing shirts emblazoned with "Bridges' enemies." Meanwhile, Kirk's allies seethed. Some called it disrespect, others vowed revenge in the cultural battlefield. Their anger only fueled the controversy further, giving oxygen to a debate that refused to cool. Clips of angry pundits railing against Obama were instantly remixed into viral memes, the old guard sputtering against a tide that seemed unstoppable. Politicians were forced off the sidelines. Progressive leaders praised the speech, citing it as proof that America still had a moral compass. Moderates tried to thread the needle, acknowledging the dignity of the delivery while warning against politicizing tragedy. And conservatives? Some doubled down on defending Kirk's legacy, while others, more cautious, quietly avoided the subject altogether. Momentum built hour by hour. Social media dashboards filled with charts showing record engagement spikes. In less than 24 hours, Obama's lines had been viewed, shared, or reposted more than 50 million times. For a nation fractured, it was one of the rare moments when nearly everyone was watching the same thing, but seeing it through radically different lenses. Yet beyond the chaos, something deeper stirred. A moral thread, buried under the noise, began weaving its way through the public consciousness. For every angry take, there was a quiet post about dignity. For every meme, a reflection about unity. And for every partisan jab, a reminder that words could still carry weight, even in an age of cynicism. The debate was far from settled. If anything, it had only grown more ferocious. But in the eye of that storm, one truth was beginning to rise. Fragile, insistent, undeniable. And yet beneath the noise, one moral truth began to rise above the chaos. The frenzy of hashtags, the arguments on cable, the divided commentaries, all of it swirled together into a moment that could have easily been dismissed as another flash in the storm of American politics. But Obama refused to let it die there. He stepped back into the frame, not as a politician trading blows, but as a voice reaching for something bigger than sides, bigger than headlines, bigger even than Charlie Kirk himself. He said what millions didn't realize they were waiting to hear. That dignity must always stand taller than hate. That unity must always cut deeper than division. His words carried not just the weight of his voice, but the echoes of history. From marches on Selma to vigils after tragedies, from immigrant families who sacrificed everything for a chance at belonging, to young Americans who dreamed of a nation not defined by its fractures, but by its promise. This was never just about Charlie Kirk, he declared. This was about us, about who we become in the face of arrogance, about whether we answer hostility with bitterness, or whether we rise above it and remember the better angels of our nature. The room may have been silent when he said it, but the silence was not emptiness. It was gravity. It was the stillness before applause, before tears, before the swelling sense that the speech wasn't a verdict on a man. It was a mirror held up to a nation. Commentators tried to spin it, but in living rooms, churches, mosques, classrooms, and kitchens, people replayed those lines not as politics, but as a moral reminder. Parents quoted it to their children. Teachers wrote it on classroom boards. Clergy folded it into sermons. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reset, a call back to something elemental. In that moment, Obama's framing turned Kirk's death into a paradox. The passing of a man known for division had sparked a conversation about unity. His legacy of arrogance had, unintentionally, opened a door for dignity to step back onto the stage. And whether one agreed or not, the very fact that such were thought about it, as echoed across the country, reminded Americans of something easy to forget, that leadership is not measured in decibels, but in direction. There was no triumphalism in his tone, no smugness, no cheap victory lap. Instead, there was gravity, a weight that forced listeners to reflect not on Charlie Kirk's fall, but on their own choices, their own place in this widening drama. Because in the end, the question wasn't whether Kirk was right or wrong. The question was what America would do now that the mirror had been lifted. This is not about erasing those we disagree with, Obama reminded them. It's about deciding who we are when the shouting ends. Do we build walls of enemies, or do we build bridges of understanding? The crescendo landed not with a roar, but with a resonance, a feeling that dignity, though quieter, always lasts longer than noise. And as those words rippled through households and headlines, it became clear that the true power of the moment wasn't in dismantling a legacy of division, but in inspiring a generation to imagine something better. The speech ended, but the challenge lingered in the air, like the final note of a song that refuses to fade. The applause, the praise, even the criticism, none of it could erase the weight of the question he left behind. Because the real story was not about Charlie Kirk, nor even about Barack Obama. The real story was about a nation confronted with a choice, a fork in its moral road. And the real test is what we do next. The storm had raged, the nation had argued. The headlines had spun in every direction. But when the noise finally began to settle, one truth remained. Moments like this don't just belong to leaders on a stage. They belong to us, to the people who decide whether these words become fleeting echoes or guiding stars. Obama's speech wasn't a conclusion. It was an invitation. An invitation to remember that dignity outlives arrogance, that unity outshines division, and that the measure of a country isn't in the noise of its loudest vows, oases, but in the choices of its everyday citizens. That's where history is written, not just in marble halls, but in living rooms, schools, workplaces, and communities.